Everybody, good morning. This morning we're going to be talking about the strike on Venezuela and the capture of Nicolás Maduro, which I'm here for. Okay, there is some skepticism and some criticism out there. Surprisingly, it looks like popular support for the activity is so substantial that it's actually difficult to find a lot of the criticism on X this morning. Things the word Venezuela by itself is trending. The term Venezuela es libre, Venezuela is free, is also trending. There's a lot of trending video of massive celebrations in Venezuela. And we're going to take a look at the operation itself, kind of what led up to it, justifications, whether or not this is reasonable. There are some questions that are worth asking, and I'm going to answer some of those questions. Now, all that said, there's some other stuff going on in the news this morning. I'm going to focus on Venezuela this morning, and then either later today, I've got a busy day today, but later today or for tomorrow's show, we'll be covering some other stuff. Right now, it's also the case that in Iran, the Iranian people are rising up and demonstrating and seizing and setting fire to the guard bases in Iran. The Iranians are not happy with their government either. There's open revolt over there. Now, I'm more interested in the story in Venezuela right now because it's more local and we have more direct involvement. I am concerned about the situation in Iran. We'll talk about that in more detail later. Probably not this morning on the show, though. This will be in the next day or two as that situation develops. Of course, the chief concern with Iran being an open revolt is whether or not Israel tries to force America to get involved, whether it should or shouldn't. I'd be perfectly happy if Iran just burnt itself to the ground. I've got one more piece of news that I want to kiss real quick before we dig in on Venezuela, though, and this is last week we covered the Somali daycare fraud and the expose from Nick Sorter, the expose from Shirley, that basically blew the lid off the whole thing. And we learned that this is something that has been under investigation for several years. There have been indictments and convictions related to the Somali fraud, billions of dollars being stolen from the American taxpayer by ill-meaning adversaries of the United States. We're going to be talking about that as it develops more and more as well, because it's important for everybody to understand that what is happening with situations like the Somali fraud, the Venezuelan gangs taking over apartment buildings in the Midwest, all of that kind of corruption and graft that's happening in the U.S. as a result of the illegal immigration. It is not the case that people came from foreign countries illegally, arrived in America, and then discovered that there's a system here that's easily exploited and decided then to take advantage of it. No, it is the case that U.S. taxpayer-funded NGOs who are getting their money laundered to them through the now defunct USAID have been actively educating hostile foreigners on the activities that they should be engaged in to take advantage of America's very insecure open benefit structures. The Somalis did not come here and become fraudsters. They came here to become fraudsters. They are a pirate nation. They have been a problem because of piracy for so long historically that they are literally the reason we have a navy. And they came here to take advantage of our weak and exposed system, right? Well, in the wake of Nick Shirley's expose and the rising the rising understanding and awareness of all this fraud that's going on in Minnesota, where it is clear that this fraud could not have continued but for corruption within our own governmental structures. We now have the news breaking this morning that Governor Tim, that was supposed to be a more dramatic reveal, that Governor Tim Walz is expected to drop his reelection bid amid Minnesota's Somali fraud probe. Embattled Minnesota Governor Tim Walz is expected to bow out of the 2026 reelection race as he faces mounting national criticism over a massive Somali fraud scandal engulfing his state. The reason that's worth noting, the reason that's worth bringing up, is because Tim Walz, right? Tim Walz is an avowed Democrat. He is a socialist. Now, unlike New York Mayor Mamdani, Tim Walz is not, as to my knowledge, a member of the Democrat Socialist Party. But let's not mix words here. The Overton window has shifted so far to the left, on the left, that to be a Democrat in 2026 is to be a socialist. Full stop. If you are a Democrat today, you are not different to a Venezuelan socialist dictator. You are not different to someone voting in the USSR. You are not different from a member of the Chinese Communist Party. If you are a Democrat today, you are a socialist. And you are opposed to the American experiment. You are opposed to the prospects and the propositions of liberty, prosperity, and the pursuit of happiness. So Tim Walz dropping out of his reelection campaign, I would take this not just fait accompli, but as essentially a public political confession to his involvement, right? So political decisions on whether or not to engage in an election, whether or not to go forward with an election, are based on the behind the scenes calculus where you do the polls, you see what the people are likely to vote for, and make determinations based on your optimism from those polls. And you couple that with examining what your assets and liabilities are. And quite simply, a major liability for Tim Walz is the enormous likelihood in the public estimation that he has been, if not directly involved and complicit in the fraud by Somalis against the Minnesota taxpayer and the American people, if not directly involved and complicit, he has at least been deeply ineffectual in taking care of that problem, in investigating and prosecuting that criminality. And the more evidence comes out, what we learn is that at the barest minimum, he has been aware of this fraud since well before his 2024 vice presidential campaign bid. He has been aware. He's been notified. Law enforcement has been investigating and attempting to bring these people to heel for at least several years, of which Tim Walz has been aware, and he has been silent on it and not done anything to pursue ending that fraud. So again, his dropping out of this election is essentially a confession of, at a minimum, his inability to do the job. And more likely, it looks like he was complicit in the fraud being pursued. Now, from there, I want to go over to talk about the Venezuelan strikes. And I can start with this. AI has given us an absolute gift here.
Train by day, Joe Rogan podcast by night, all day.
This getting funny, Joe. I was right in the middle of taking a shit.
Train by day.
I ain't gonna lie, guys. This is what AI is for, right? This is what I'm here for.
Come get me. I'm waiting. The American president is a coward. Come get me. I'm waiting.
Well, how about that? Quicker than DoorDash.
That is rock solid right there. I'm here for the comedy. Absolutely. I got one more of these AI slop videos that I want to share with you. It's just too good. It's just too damn good.
Hola amigos, yo soy su nuevo presidente, el señor Donaldo J. Trumpo. Your ex-presidente, el señor Maduro, is no longer your presidente. He kept talking shit, and fucking around, though, and he ultimately found out, though. Anyway, we're going to make Venezuela grande again. Mucho grande. El bigger y el better than ever before. We're going to drill, baby drill. We're going to have a big, beautiful fiesta, all the tacos you want. Mucho mariachi, sexy mamacitas, and delicious margaritas. And President Trumpo is going to be el DJ, okay? Muchas gracias, muchachos. Y let's make el Venezuela grande again. Arriba el Venezuela, amigos. Hola, amigos.
I mean, I'm absolutely here for the comedy, right? But I want to remind you guys, before you hear any of the criticism from the left, there's a couple of things I want to remind you of. Venezuela has been a problem for a hot minute, okay? This is a clip of Chuck Schumer back in 2020.
Doing, but his actions belie his, he brags about all these things he wants to do or is doing, but his actions belie his words. Maybe the best metaphor was his claim to bring democracy to Venezuela. There was a big policy there. It flopped. If the policy was working, Juan Guaido wouldn't be in the balcony here. He'd be in Venezuela. He'd be sitting in the president's palace, or at least waging a fight to win. He's here. And the president brags about his Venezuela policy? Give us a break. He hasn't.
So what's the takeaway there? The takeaway is that we should have done something previously, that we shouldn't have waited so long to move on Venezuela, to move on Maduro. And that's all the way back from 2020, right? Now, this one is from during the Biden administration. You've got Press Secretary KJP here.
Quickly turn to Venezuela, where Maduro once again demonstrated his complete disregard for democratic norms and proceeded with his illegitimate inauguration. As President Biden emphasized during his meeting with President-elect Edmundo Gonzalez Urrutia on Monday, January 6th, we believe that it is.
Note right there, that's the Biden administration's mouthpiece saying that the Venezuelan election that put Maduro in power, or kept Maduro in power, was an illegitimate election, and that his opponent, Guaido, whatever, that his opponent was the legitimate winner of that election. Okay, we'll come back to the legitimacy question of Maduro's election, which, yeah, there's a lot to be had there. We'll come back to that in just a minute.
It is essential that the will of the Venezuelan people is respected.
It's essential that the will of the Venezuelan people is respected. But while the American president at the time, former Vice President Joe Biden, who we now know conclusively, without a doubt, was not legitimately elected in the United States, he's got his mouthpiece out there saying that the will of the Venezuelan people must be respected, that's our official position, and yet did nothing substantive about it, right? You're going to hear her go on to talk about what they did about it. And
in coordination with our partners, we've given Maduro and his representatives every opportunity to restore democracy, but they haven't. So today we are building on all of our previous actions and taking further major actions. We announced new sanctions on key Maduro-aligned officials as a part of our efforts to hold them accountable, and we imposed more visa restrictions totaling nearly 2,000 individuals. We also increased the reward amount to $25 million for Nicolás Maduro and his so-called Minister of Interior as part of the Department of State's Narcotics Rewards Program.
So the Biden administration put a $25 million bounty out on Maduro. And in fact, there was at the time that the raid occurred, there was a $50 million bounty out for Maduro. Okay. So the U.S. has made it very clear that we have an interest in eliminating Maduro. And there are good reasons for that. But let's back up. Let's back up just a little bit. Let's take a look at what actually happened. What actually went down on the 3rd. And forget about justification, forget about rationality, reasonality, legality, and all that for just a minute while I say this. This was an absolutely beautiful military action. This is the kind of military action that I would prefer to see our country take with increasing frequency where necessary. Okay? You're going to hear a lot of criticism about Donald Trump's promise for no new wars. I'm going to make the argument this morning that through this action, because it was such a beautiful military maneuver, he actually enforced, not broke, that promise. Now, you guys know me. I'm a big Trump fan, but I'm not an unmitigated apologist. We've been very critical of Trump on his handling of things like the Epstein files, which was a complete shit show, right? He failed miserably on that, especially in public optics. I am not a total apologist for any regime, nor will I ever be. That said, what we just saw with this execution is exactly what we should be doing with military strikes when the need arises. You look at situations like Afghanistan, and what happened? We did not go in with violence of action and efficiency of force and prosecute the enemy to eliminate or capture him. Instead, we occupied and fought a war for over 20 years with no clear objectives, with no defined end state. And another critical error that was committed that drug Afghanistan out interminably is we labored under the false presupposition that Afghani people were intelligent enough to be trusted with their own governance. Right? You know, famously, we know that the American founders told us that the Project of Liberty is only suited to a religious and moral people. Muslims are not moral. They are religious, but not moral. They do not meet the qualification to live in a free society because they are not moral people. They are only religious. They're missing an important key factor there. Now, with what just happened in Venezuela, the strike was quick. It was efficient. There were no losses to the American forces. About 40 Venezuelans died, mostly military. Delta Force went in, handled business. Right, so basically, we flew a shitload of aircraft in, handled the anti-air installations on their military positions, used the 150 some aircraft there to create a sound blanket, right? A deafening cacophony of beautiful liberty flying over the country in order to give cover for our Chinook that dropped in the Delta Force operators on top of Maduro's building. They entered, acquired Maduro and his wife, and brought them out alive, left the country, and brought him to New York. Which also, by the way, political visibility, masterstroke. Mamdani is a socialist, is a communist, is an avowed communist. He calls himself a socialist. He calls himself a communist. And Trump just brought a communist dictator from outside the country to be prosecuted in New York. Now, personally, I'm not a big fan of bringing him back and prosecuting him. I'd rather see his head on a spike. But as somebody who has prosecuted high-value targets in combat zones myself, as much as I would prefer, right, as much as I'm a fan of Rorschach's, criminals get arrested, dogs get put down, as much as I'm a fan of that logic, the fact is the enemy has intelligence, and that intelligence must tactically be exploited. So more often than not, even when I was an operator, we would, I had to capture the enemy so that we could exploit the intelligence asset that was there in order to capture more enemy. The beauty of a captured foe of a when you capture them alive is their own minds allow you to become the virus that sinks the rest of their organization, which is powerful, and that's worth doing. In the case of Maduro, what likely is going to come from his interrogation is going to be information about Venezuela's relationship with our foreign adversaries, most especially with China. We'll get to that a little bit more as we get into justification in a minute. But and I'll go ahead and put a bow on this point. Just the fact that the operation was quick and we're in and out, no forever war. We didn't drop an occupying force. That is what I want to see our military doing. That is correct military action. And make no mistake, when I say that, that's not just that I like to win. If we're going to do it, let's do it. Let's win it. Right? Don't screw around. Just get in there and get it done. Yes, absolutely that. But also it's worth it. It's worth understanding this. Like we pointed out, there were about 40 casualties, all Venezuelan, mostly military, very little collateral damage. Right? In a drawn-out war, right, you have thousands of casualties in Afghanistan because we were there for so long. And that's not just the result of the war itself, but the war was going on over there is something that destabilizes the local community. It makes local law enforcement less effective. And in Afghanistan, in the case of Afghanistan especially, the local law enforcement was so grossly corrupt that they may as well not have been in operation at all. So you have local warlords, local power brokers engaged in internal Nicene conflicts with one another, which creates even higher local civilian casualty rates. And there's just nothing that can be done about that short of prosecuting the war efficiently and getting it over with, getting out, restoring stability. So let's talk about justification. My feet are getting a little too toasty, Uncle Steve. I had to turn the heater off. It works though. I still appreciate that. So, going into Venezuela, let me just adjust my notes here. Who is Maduro? Maduro is a socialist dictator. He was initially elected. He lost. He's lost. I believe he's lost 2 elections now. And now, understand when I say that the official narrative from the Venezuelan government is that Maduro won with 51% of the vote, and his opponent had 44% of the vote. That is the official narrative, kind of like 2020, where officially Joe Biden won. However, there are multiple independent investigations that have been conducted into the Venezuelan elections that seem to suggest that no, it was actually Maduro had legitimately about 30% of the vote, and his opponent had about 62% of the vote. But the government just hid things. There was a massive lack of official public transparency, and the available data on official ballots seems to show that, in fact, Maduro lost. I mean, he didn't just lose. It wasn't a narrow majority. He was absolutely smoked, right? But he just refused to leave office. He refused to step down. Stayed in power, right? And Santa Steve asks, do they use Dominion voting machines? You know, it wouldn't surprise me, but I don't want to get too hung up on the Dominion voting machines, Uncle Steve, because even in the 2020 election, which was obviously stolen, the Dominion voting machines were a red herring. They were not the actual problem. They were, and Pitt Danny points out, they invented the Dominion machines. That, I believe, is true, but I don't know. And again, I'm not going to go too far down that rabbit hole because, like I said, in the 2020 election here in the United States that was stolen by the Democrats from Donald Trump, the Dominion voting machines played an outsized role in the public narrative on the question of the legitimacy of the election, and they were not the actual problem. That's not how the election was stolen. They were a factor, yes. They were not the key factor. So Maduro has been in charge since, is it 2013? I think was his original election. But as of 1992, Venezuela was one of the wealthiest countries in the world because Venezuela actually has greater oil reserves than the Middle East. Now, Venezuelan oil, however, is heavier. Right, there's some difference in the way that oil is extracted in Venezuela than the Middle East. So Middle Eastern oil is apparently easier to extract and refine, but there's a shitload of oil over there. Don't get me wrong. There's enough oil in the Middle East to get us interested, which is a big deal. But Venezuela has a much larger, richer oil reserve. But the richer is apparently a bit of a problem. It makes it more difficult to process. So in the early, the late 20s, early 30s, America got involved in Venezuela when it was discovered that they had the oil around, and we sent our guys. We sent our oil producers, our oil men to Venezuela to build the Venezuelan energy industry, right? At the time, Venezuela they hardly had electricity. It was a totally agrarian society, very, very poor country. And they just, it was discovered that they had massive oil reserves, and America went down there, put them in the oil business, and made them one of the wealthiest countries in the world. Since Maduro took power, he has retracted the Venezuelan economy by 80%, through nothing more than the application of socialist mismanagement. He has destroyed that country. They went from 1992 being one of the wealthiest countries on the planet to 2013, they're killing and eating the animals in the zoo because they're starving. Right? That's what socialism does. That's what socialism does to a country. And then Maduro refused to step down. That's a problem. Pitt Danny says Chavez got it started. Okay. Since Maduro took power, the massive reduction in their economy. And let's be fair. Let's be real. We've got plenty of oil in America. We don't actually need Venezuelan oil. You're going to hear a whole lot of criticism. Oh, this has got nothing to do with politics or anything else. It's just the oil. America's just greedy and they want all the oil. Okay, check it out. They've got oil. It's cool if we want to get that oil. Right? That's cool. But we've got plenty of oil in the U.S. Donald Trump proved that in his first term, as if we didn't already know it. He proved it in the first term by making the United States of America completely energy independent. For the first time in our history, we had become a net exporter in the energy industry. Joe Biden switched that off on purpose, intentionally, as one of his very first acts coming into power when he was inaugurated illegitimately in 2021, right? So we don't need Venezuelan oil. That said, Venezuela is selling oil to China. That is a fucking problem. We cannot have a geopolitical adversary in the global south actively, right in our backyard, actively supplying energy to our geopolitical adversaries on the other side of the world. We cannot continue to tolerate that. That alone is justification for any military action to seize that asset. Right? You wouldn't. Oh. China is a net exporter of viral sociopathy. That's what TikTok is. You pop on TikTok in China and you'll learn how to do good math. You pop on TikTok in America and you just might cut your own nuts off. And that is not by accident. China is a bigger problem than most of you can understand on so many levels. I won't dig into that any further here. Just take my word for it for right now. Go back and watch our deep dive on China. And excuse me, fair play. Our deep dive on China is about the history of China as a proto-communist state leading up to what it is today. We'd probably owe you another deep dive on the gross corruption of China and the dangers of China as a geopolitical adversary today in modernity. So we'll probably be revisiting that in the not too distant future. I say not too distant future. I think we've got the next 3 deep dives already mapped out, but anyway, that's besides the point. That Venezuela is selling oil to China is reason enough for us to take a military action in that country. Now, that said, there are more reasons. Throughout the tenure of Joe Biden and his open borders policy, flooding the United States with millions, tens of millions of hostile foreign invaders, which is the correct term. You'll hear people say, these squishy libs, they say undocumented workers and undocumented citizens. The correct term is illegal alien. No, illegal alien is too soft. The correct language is hostile foreign invader. An illegal alien is someone who has crossed the border illegally. When you cross the border of a sovereign nation in violation of the law of that sovereign country, what you have done is you have done an invasion activity. You have committed an act of war. Every hostile foreign invader, every illegal alien, is a hostile foreign invader. Every one of them is a justification for swift, responsive military action against the host nation of that hostile foreign invader. Venezuela has been one of the chief offenders in that activity, because we are not only seeing hostile foreign invaders coming from Venezuela, we are seeing Venezuela, the Venezuelan government under Maduro, actively releasing their most violent murderers, rapists, and drug dealers, cartel members, etc., and the mentally unstable, the mentally ill from their prisons, asylums, mental hospitals, and actively supporting their entrance into the United States illegally by coming up through Mexico and crossing the border. Venezuela has been intentionally sent, right? Remember, Donald Trump got massive criticism when he said they're not sending their best. They're not sending their best. They're not sending their doctors and lawyers. They're sending their drug dealers or rapists or murderers. And he got painted with this broad oh, he's a racist. He just said that all Mexicans are rapists and murderers and drug dealers. No. Right? When you criticize the statement, some of them are, by saying you're a racist, what you're saying is that none of them are. And the evidence is widely contrary to that. We have seen many, even within the context of personal anecdotes, hostile foreign invaders commit rapes and murders against domestic citizens. And we've seen these Democrat activist judges releasing those people back onto the street with no consequences. When Tren de Aragua was taking over apartment buildings in the Midwest, they were able to do it with impunity. The police would not respond. The police would not go in and enforce the law and remove those hostile foreign invaders who were taking over the apartment buildings. Tren de Aragua moved in, would go door to door, knocking on the doors in the apartment buildings, collecting rent, right? And then telling the people, you will pay the rent to us. And then they didn't have any money to pay the rent to the actual landlords. Well, the landlords suddenly didn't have any authority because the police would not go in to evict people who were not paying the rent, right? See, even that could have been a solution, right? The owners of the apartment building could have said, well, you know, Joey in apartment D12 hasn't paid his rent for 3 months. We're sending him an eviction notice and he has to move out. And eventually, right, there wouldn't be anybody there for the gangs to take advantage of, and the gang would be starved out. But they wouldn't even do that. Now, understand, when I say they, I mean the police. The actual law enforcement in the area wouldn't even do that. We did deep dive coverage on this when it happened. Well, I was here when we did it, so it's been less than 2 years. It was last summer sometime. Excuse me. So you've got that. You've got the criminals. It's not just, you know, economic migrants coming looking for a better life. They're actively sending criminals from Venezuela to come here and attack the United States. This is a calculated military maneuver, which it appears is basically done not just by a hostile and virulent Maduro, but in concert with the interests of the Chinese Communist Party to destabilize the United States politically and economically. Right? This is something that is, y'all. China is conducting a war against the United States. The United States is not participating in the war that is being conducted against us. That alone, that by itself, right? And this is not the first time I've said this morning. That by itself, that single factor, would also be sufficient justification for this activity, right? And again, I'm not a Trump apologist, not a total Trump apologist. He's gotten things wrong. The bump stocks were a big problem, and we've been very aggressive in criticizing him over that. I want to make that clear, that I'm not going to sit here and defend Trump when he's wrong. And the reason I want to make that clear is because this time, he's not wrong. This is excellent. This is excellent. The identification of a substantial national security threat, followed by the immediate military prosecution of that threat. That is correct governance. That is what the military is for. That is what the government is for. I would go so far as to say this is one of the very, very few legitimate functions of government that our government is currently involved in. The vast majority of what our government does at the state, national, and local levels is illegitimate, is not a legitimate function of government, right? Welfare state nonsense. Right? Hell, even drug control. Constitutionally, the prohibition on the use of illicit substances is unconstitutional, right? Not saying I want people doing drugs, not even saying that I support legalization, but when you read through understand our laws, there are things that are good, there are things that are illegitimate, there are things that we should be doing, there are things that we're not doing. So the legitimate criticism, Xander Mack asks, we are going to run Venezuela. Do you defend that also? To a point. Now, what we want to see in Venezuela is we want to see their legitimately elected government be legitimately elected and begin conducting that activity. Now that Maduro has been removed, there's concern, just like when Trump took office, right? One of the biggest mistakes that Trump made when he first took office in 2017 is he came in and he let a lot of people just keep going business as usual. He didn't fire everybody. Now, it is a very fair criticism, and this is absolutely true, that removing Maduro can easily be a destabilizing force in Venezuela. So, some careful observation while they get their feet back under them, it might be warranted. And we'll see how that plays out. Now, if the Donald decides that we need to establish new military bases and stay in Venezuela long term, unless that's basically being funded exclusively through the extraction of Venezuelan oil, then I'm not going to be a fan of it. Right? So, like I said, in, out, done, I'm great with that. And I can even tolerate that there is some fallout management and mitigation that is our responsibility as the initiators here. But no, I don't want to see us. I don't want to see us just hang around and run it forever. Sergeant Major says we have no choice but to run Venezuela until a stable government is in place. Yeah, and as long as we don't get ourselves entrenched in, generational or decadal freaking nation building down there, I'm going to be okay with that. That'll work. So I hope that answers your question, Alex. Let's see. Let me just look at my notes real quick. I already covered the Maduro election. We're going to hear a lot of. Hang on. Okay, Alex. Yes. Okay. Let me tackle this real quick. So observation, that's one thing, and I'm hoping that language gets softened and clarified. I think you and I agree on that wholeheartedly. And then you say, but we need to fix America before Venezuela. I'm going to say sort of, right? You know me. I generally, my position is generally we need to deal with the problems that we have in America before we worry about anything overseas. We should not be sending a penny to a starving child in Africa until there are no starving children in America. Absolutely. I agree. That said, fixing Venezuela is fixing problems that we have in America. As I've already laid out and detailed, right, Venezuela is actively providing aid and support to our geopolitical enemies and is actively conducting an invasionary military action through sending all of its murderers and rapists and drug dealers and the like from their prisons. So it's not an either or. We need to fix America before we fix Venezuela. Venezuela is one of those American problems that we need to fix. Fixing Venezuela is fixing America. If we can retard their production and distribution of oil to China and shut down the criminals that are being exported from Venezuela to America, that does fix America's problems. Not all of them, obviously, but a great many of them. And it also serves to bolster the American economy. We've already seen oil start trading lower on futures as a result of America capturing Venezuela effectively. So that's all to the good. That's all to the positive there. One of the arguments that you're going to hear that we're already hearing from the left is, oh, well, Donald Trump just taking this unilateral military action. That's just giving permission to people like Putin and Xi and all those bad guys out there. It's just giving permission to them to do invasions and stuff like. What world are y'all living in? Did you forget about Russia, the Russo-Ukraine conflict? They don't need permission. They're already fucking doing it. Right? That's the same squishy bullshit GOP argument we hear about things like not ending the filibuster and going ahead and getting the Trump administration, the Trump agenda through. It's, well, if we do this now, then the opposition will just use it against us in the future. No. That is not an intelligent line of argumentation there. It's not. It's not coherent. Because the fact is, they have shown us, the Democrats showed us with the absolute absurdity of their two bullshit hoax impeachments, the unmitigated lawfare, the gerrymandering nationwide. We just heard this whole conflict about, oh, well, the Republicans are doing all this gerrymandering. You know why Democrats don't do any more gerrymandering? Because they've done it. Because they have gerrymandered it all away. There's not much room left for them to squeeze another illegitimate gerrymander. It's already been done, right? So the idea that somehow Donald Trump taking this action against Venezuela is going to give permission to bad actors to take bad actions, you can dismiss that criticism, you can dismiss that argument out of hand, right? Because it really is this simple. They've already done it. They're already doing it. They're not asking for permission. They're not waiting for permission. They're just doing shit. And then, the other piece, like I just showed you guys that presser from Karine Jean-Pierre, where she was saying we're not doing enough. We have to take action. And then they didn't do anything. Well, we did sanctions. We did visa restrictions. And what was the result? There was no result. There was no result. So we found ourselves in a position where, okay, we tried the wiffle bat. We tried the wiffle bat. No result. We tried the frat paddle. No result. Now it's time for the spiked mace. Okay? Listen. I said clean your fucking room. Right? I turned off the television. I took away your iPad. I watched you do 50 push-ups. Eventually, we're going to have to talk to Mr. Belt. Right? I said quit hitting your sister. I docked your allowance. I hid your laptop. Eventually, you have to learn the lesson one way or another. You cannot be permitted to continue in harmful activity. Aaron Olson says, spiked mace? I know what you mean, but spiked with chili powder? No, Aaron, you may have missed this, but I am personally an advocate for the toaster and a bed sheet politics. I'm a big fan of toaster and a bed sheet diplomacy. I've seen me do it. It's very effective. Okay. Let's see. What else did I want to do? The message was clear. Exporting criminals has consequences. Weaponized migration will not be tolerated. Supporting U.S. adversaries carries costs. Boundary enforcement, not punishment. Yes, focus on sovereignty and omit election theft. Yeah, okay. So, Sergeant Major asks, are you saying I should have spanked you more? No, I think I got enough. I I think I got beat enough. I did. I remember the last time my father gave me a spanking. He sent me to the willow tree to pick a switch. I picked a switch. I brought it back, and he said the words to me. He said the words, "This is going to hurt you. This is going to hurt me more than it hurts you." Now, let me tell you something. At the time, I was not a father. I understood that phrase academically, theoretically. I could not grok it, right? It's one of those threshold things that we talk about. You cannot explain to a person what it means to be a parent until they've had that experience for themselves, right? You cannot explain to somebody what it's like to go to war until they've had that experience for themselves. You cannot drag a child across the threshold into adulthood by explanation. That knowledge can only be acquired by crossing the threshold. And the sergeant major said, "This is going to hurt me more than it hurts you." And I mouthed off and I said, "Well, then let me hit you." That did not work out for me. But that was the last time I got my ass beat. And here's the funny bit. I remember why I got my ass beat when it happened. Right? I remember the time that my mother jumped from the hill, right? As I was running up the hill, she jumped and while airborne, drew back and slapped the ever-loving shit out of me. I mean, just one hand from the sky, wrath of God. And it was because I had hit my sister in the face with a marshmallow that was on fire at the time. And hey, I was like 10. I didn't realize that the marshmallow hit her. That was an accident. And then I laughed because when somebody gets hit in the face by something sticky like a cream pie, that's funny. And then it occurred to me, oh shit, that probably hurts. And my sister went running and she was on fire and I was running behind her and I was trying to say I'm sorry, but it was my fault. Now that last time, when I turned and said, well, then let me hit you, I have no idea what I got into trouble for. No clue. I cannot remember for the life of me what it was that I had done, what the infraction was, because the thing I remember was that conversation. So no, Sergeant Major, I think I got spanked enough. Pet Daddy says, thank you, sir. May I have another? So, basically, I'm going to conclude on this. Every man that I have a theory of the ass whooping. I do. And in this context, before I explain my theory of the ass whooping, I want you guys to understand, in this context, when I say the ass whooping, I am talking about a couple of different things. Yes, I'm talking about a little corporal punishment, right? Your strong father figure showing good discipline, right? You know, in my house, we don't do the spankings. We don't do spankings a lot. We do PT. We do push-ups. We do sit-ups. We do teacups, right? If you're not familiar, teacups is basically where you stand with you hold an object out in front of you like this, right? As a soldier, often the teacups we would hold the rifle by the front sight post and the extended charging handle, and just hold it like that for a long time. That's devastating. So usually in my house we do push-ups, sit-ups, flutter kicks, right? We do PT. I mean, my wife and I are both non-commissioned officers. It's how we raise the kids. For safety infractions, right? You hit your sister, you're probably getting slapped. You're probably getting a spanking. I don't have a willow tree, so I'll send them to the kitchen to get me a wooden spoon. We don't have infractions of that level with any frequency in my house. But back to the point, when I say ass whoopings, I am talking about that, right? And not just actual what modern squishy liberals would refer to as child abuse that's actually just discipline. And I'm not making the argument that there's no such thing as child abuse. I'm making the argument that discipline and child abuse are two different things. But that's one thing in the category of ass whoopings. Then there's what the modern squishy liberal would call bullying. Well, there is a point where hazing, bullying has gone too far, but bullying does serve a legitimate social function, and that is the enforcement of social norms and mores, right? A place where we have failed our children dramatically. The anti-bullying campaigns are directly responsible for deaths by suicide in the LGBT, especially the T community, because they have allowed that community, and in fact, enabled that community and caused it to grow and flourish and infect more and more young, weak minds. And then there's running afoul of the law, right? You get a couple of speeding tickets and you get over that shit. And not just that, just straight up losing. You lose enough chess games, you learn how other people win and you get better at it. You open a few small businesses and fail, you learn how you failed and you get better at it. Every man is born with an ass whoopings quota. You need a certain number of ass whoopings to be a man, to become an actual man. Now, everybody's ass whoopings quota is not the same. That number goes up and down depending on, from one situation to another. You might start with a very high ass whoopings quota because you're just stubborn, or you may start with a high ass whoopings quota because you were born into bad circumstances where the early parts of your life didn't take points off of your ass whoopings quota, right? Your ass whoopings quota can be lowered by seeing someone else's ass whooping. Right. Oh, wow. He stole he stole a cookie off the rack before we were supposed to have him, and mommy hit him in the head with a chancla. I won't be stealing no cookies off the rack. Your ass whooping quota just shrunk a little bit. Maduro has just met the end of his ass whoopings quota. Maduro has been acting a fool for over a decade because he was allowed to do it with impunity. The same is true of China, of Russia, of Iran, of Afghanistan, of Israel, of the entire European Union. They have been acting a fool. They have been ruining the lives of their people. This is also true in America to a lesser extent, because they have not met their ass whoopings quota. And just like little Billy watching little Timmy get chocolate in the face for stealing a cookie and deciding, I'm not going to do that anymore. This strike on Maduro, that's a chocolate to the face for all of his commie siblings who are now going to have to stop and say, oh, well, we at least want to wait to fuck around until Donald Trump gets out of office. Now, the other side of that's going to be worth paying close attention to, especially now that we've seen the 300,000 ballots in Georgia that show us conclusive proof that it is no longer a statement in controversy that the 2020 election was stolen. We need to be paying close attention, because one of the things that happened in 2020 is China flooded America with fake driver's licenses that were also used to cast illegitimate ballots in our country. After what we just saw with Maduro, our geopolitical adversaries will be actively involved in trying to defraud the American people in 2028, because they have a vested interest in putting Democrats in charge in America. Because they know when you put a Democrat in charge in America, the borders get open, the hostile foreign invaders come in like a fucking tidal wave, And the Democrats will begin immediately and explicitly and intentionally. The Democrats will begin immediately and explicitly and intentionally dismantling American economic independence, sovereignty, liberty, and prosperity to further the interests of her adversaries. And so they will be actively engaged in attempting to steal the election in 2028. And that's something we've got to be paying attention to going forward. Hey, we're in midterms now, guys. It's here. There will be some shenanigans this year as well, right? It'll be much bigger in 2028 when there's a general election. But China is going to be pouring money into America to try and shift American opinion and move toward getting Donald Trump impeached. China especially will be actively involved in that. And if Donald Trump gets replaced with a Democrat, if the Democrats take control of the House and Senate, one of the first things they're going to do is essentially turn Venezuela over to China. I mean, the objective of the Democrat Party right now is to convert American wealth into Chinese power. That's what the Democrat Party is there for. So I'm going to go ahead and put a pin in it there this morning, guys. Thanks for watching. We love you, and we will see you tomorrow. I just hit the button. Whew, a little soft panic there. I thought I was going to have to reboot the show and go, good God, here we go.